There are moments in a man's life where time itself becomes prophetic, where days and seasons stop being ordinary measurements and become gates of destiny. And tonight, as we stand at the threshold of another year, God is calling us into a realm of spiritual awakening and militant prayer. For many of us, this year has carried joy and pain, progress and setbacks. But hear me, nothing that was lost is beyond recovery when God arises as a restorer. The end of a year is never just a natural transition. It is a spiritual gate, a moment filled with movements in the realm of the spirit that many people never discern. Time is not merely a sequence of days and months. It is a carrier of prophetic possibilities. Every season that begins and ends carries within it assignments, battles, and opportunities that shape destiny. When you approach the end of a year casually, treating it as nothing more than another date on the calendar, you risk forfeiting the spiritual transactions that God has allocated for that moment. Gates in the realm of the spirit are openings where influences enter and depart, where verdicts are sealed, where possibilities shift, and the end of a year is one of the most significant of these gates. It is a moment of convergence, when what was and what will be collide, and the decisions, prayers, and alignments made here can echo far into the future. It is at this time of the year that spiritual activities heighten. Whether you are aware of it or not, there is movement in the heavens and movement in the kingdom of darkness. Destinies are assessed, patterns attempt to re-establish themselves, and spiritual forces contend for what the next season of your life will look like. Many people enter a new year with excitement but without discernment, not realizing that the end of the previous year was a battleground they failed to engage. They step into the new season only to find themselves repeating old cycles, wrestling with familiar losses, confronting the same limitations, and wondering why nothing changed. But these things do not happen by accident. Every new season is accessed intentionally, and the end of the year is that door through which you determine what follows. This spiritual gate carries both vulnerability and potential. Vulnerability because the enemy seeks to manipulate transitions, times when your guard may be down, when you are tired, distracted, or overwhelmed by the cumulative experiences of the year. It is during these moments that the enemy often attempts to plant seeds of discouragement, fear, stagnation, and loss. He understands that whoever controls the gates controls the season. But this moment also carries tremendous potential because God Himself positions these times as moments of reset and restoration. It is an opportunity to recalibrate, to realign, to gather strength, and to enforce divine verdicts over your life. When you understand that the end of the year is a gate, you begin to approach it with intentionality. You don't simply celebrate, you evaluate. You don't just reflect, you contend. You don't merely hope for a better year. You legislate what the new season must look like through prayer, fasting, alignment, and spiritual understanding. Spiritual gates are not crossed casually. They are crossed with the consciousness of destiny. You stand at the threshold and declare that what hindered you in the past season will not follow you into the next, that what was stolen must be restored, and that the next year will not inherit the battles that were ignored in the present one. Time has a voice, and seasons speak. They carry memories of obedience and disobedience, victories and neglect. At the end of the year, heaven calls you to account for what was entrusted to you. This is not to condemn, but to refine, to show you where to reinforce, where to repent, where to recover, and where to rebuild. The Spirit of God heightens sensitivity in such seasons because He knows that what you do at the gate determines what happens inside the city. Your capacity to hear God, to discern instructions, to let go of weights, to break familiar patterns, and to stir spiritual atmosphere becomes crucial. A year is not closed by simply watching the calendar flip. It is closed by securing spiritual victory. Every destiny, whether of an individual, a family, or a ministry, rises or falls at gates. And because the end of the year is a major spiritual gate, you must treat it with the seriousness of someone who understands that transitions shape outcomes. If you leave this moment unattended, you permit the enemy to arrange the next chapter of your life. But when you stand at this gate with understanding, with conviction, with spiritual violence, and with prophetic sensitivity, you position yourself to recover, to realign, and to enter the new season with authority and clarity. Nothing truly lost is irrecoverable when aligned with God's power and destiny. This statement is not motivational language. It is a spiritual reality anchored in the nature and integrity of God. Loss is one of the most painful experiences of human existence. Loss of time, relationships, opportunities, resources, passion, health, or spiritual fire. Many people walk through life carrying silent wounds from things they once held dearly but somehow slipped away. And in those moments the enemy whispers the lie that what is gone can never return, that the chapter is closed, that the damage is permanent, and that destiny must now adjust to lack. But without an understanding of the restorative dimension of God, people begin to normalize what was never meant to define their lives. God is a restorer by nature. Restoration is not an emergency response for him. It is part of his eternal character. When he steps into situations, he does not merely replace. He renews, he multiplies, he reconfigures, and he redeems. In the economy of God, nothing is ever completely lost when placed under the influence of his power. The enemy can steal, life can break, choices can mislead, and seasons can shift unexpectedly. But as long as the breath of God still rests upon you, your story is not concluded. The kingdom of God is built on the revelation that what was lost in one season can be recovered in another, and what slipped through your hands can return stronger, purer, and more aligned with destiny. Loss does not have the final verdict. God does. When you align with divine power, the question is no longer, can what I lost be restored? But what must I do to partner with God for restoration? Because restoration is not passive, it demands cooperation. God restores when a man positions himself within the currents of his intention. That means opening your heart to believe again, praying with a sense of holy insistence, discerning what triggered the original loss, and letting the Spirit reorder your priorities. Many times the restoration God brings is not a simple return of what was lost, but an upgraded version of it. Better relationships, improved opportunities, refined character, deeper wisdom, heightened spiritual authority. What you lost may have been too small for the version of you God is building. Loss is often the enemy's attempt to cripple your identity and reduce your expectation. He knows that if he can convince you to accept loss as final, you will surrender territory voluntarily. People who believe restoration is impossible stop fighting, stop believing, stop contending, and begin to accept a smaller life. But when light breaks forth, when understanding comes, when revelation rises in your spirit, and you recognize that nothing truly lost is beyond recovery, strength begins to return, hope is revived, prayer becomes intentional. You begin to confront the forces that stole from you with the authority of someone who knows that God stands behind every decree of restoration. The reason God can restore what is lost is because time, seasons, outcomes, and possibilities are all under his command. What you lost 5 years ago is not beyond his reach. What slipped away through immaturity or ignorance is not beyond his repair. What the enemy tampered with through warfare is not beyond his justice. God is not limited by chronological time. He can revisit seasons, reopen opportunities, and resurrect what seemed permanently finished. To say that nothing is irrecoverable is to affirm that God's sovereignty extends beyond the mistakes of men and the schemes of darkness. Restoration also requires a shift in mindset. Many people mourn loss so deeply that they cannot perceive the possibility of recovery. They stay tied to the memory of what was, unable to imagine what can be. But spiritual maturity demands that you release your grief and embrace divine possibility. This is not denial of pain, it is elevation above it. When you align with God, you allow His perspective to govern your understanding of your situation. And from His perspective, no loss is final, no damage is permanent, and no season is beyond redemption. When God restores, He restores with purpose. He does not give things back to merely return you to where you were. He restores to launch you into where you were always meant to be. The restoration of God comes with wisdom you lacked previously, discernment you did not walk in before, and a deeper awareness of His faithfulness. You emerge stronger, wiser, and more anchored in destiny. Nothing is truly lost when placed in the hands of the God who restores. Spiritual sensitivity is required to discern what the enemy stole in the past seasons. Many people go through life unaware that not all losses are natural, not all setbacks are accidental, and not all delays are circumstantial. There are losses that occur through carelessness, there are losses that occur through ignorance, and there are losses that occur through spiritual warfare. But without sensitivity, without discernment, without an awakened spirit, a person can walk through an entire year watching things diminish: peace, joy, finance, relationships, favor, opportunities, yet never recognize that something spiritual is responsible. Sensitivity is the ability to perceive beyond the surface, to hear what others do not hear, to see what is invisible to the natural eye, and to interpret the movements of the spiritual realm with accuracy. The enemy depends on spiritual ignorance to carry out his operations. He preys on believers who are sincere but not discerning, prayerful but not perceptive, active but not spiritually intelligent. When a person lacks sensitivity, the enemy can steal from them in broad daylight. He can tamper with their destiny, drain their passion for God, shut doors that should have opened, and plant patterns that limit progress. And because they cannot discern, they attribute everything to coincidence, bad luck, personality, or external circumstances. But in the realm of the Spirit, ignorance is not an excuse. It is an open door. What you cannot perceive, you cannot confront. What you cannot recognize, you cannot resist. What you do not identify, you cannot recover. Sensitivity demands that you train your spirit to recognize unusual patterns. When opportunities consistently slip from your hands, when relationships that should have lasted begin to collapse without reason, when progress suddenly slows down, when confusion rises every time you attempt to advance, when peace becomes unstable, when prayer becomes difficult, when hunger for God suddenly dies, these are not random occurrences. They are signals, they are alarms, they are indicators that something spiritual is attempting to influence your destiny. But without a trained spirit, you will ignore these indicators and continue navigating life with natural tools in a spiritual battlefield. Discernment is what allows you to identify the footprints of the enemy. It is what helps you trace the origin of loss. It enables you to separate what is of God, what is of the flesh, and what is of darkness. Many believers pray, but few discern. They fast, but they do not interpret. They attend church, but they do not observe what is happening around them spiritually. Sensitivity is what makes prayer effective. Without it, a person prays vague prayers, scattered prayers, emotional prayers. But with sensitivity, prayer becomes strategic, targeted, precise, and forceful. You begin to pray with the accuracy of someone who knows exactly what was stolen, when it was stolen, how it was stolen, and what must be done to enforce restoration. A spiritually sensitive person understands that loss is rarely immediate. It begins subtly, with distractions, with weariness, with small compromises, with reduced prayer, with broken focus, with disconnection from spiritual authority, with delayed obedience. By the time physical loss appears, the spiritual theft has long been completed. Sensitivity helps you catch the process early. It allows you to perceive when your spiritual armor is weakening, when your passion is leaking, when your atmosphere is shifting, when your discernment is dulling. And in those moments, sensitivity empowers you to rise quickly, to respond spiritually, and to shut the door before the enemy establishes a foothold. Discernment also helps you identify the seasons where the enemy is most active. There are moments in a person's life where spiritual attacks intensify, times of transition, times of elevation, times of weakness, times of grief, times of distraction, times of breakthrough. Without sensitivity, you will misinterpret the intensity of warfare and assume God is far, unaware that the enemy often fights hardest when you are closest to something significant. Sensitivity helps you recognize that increased warfare is not always a sign of defeat. It can be the final resistance before a major breakthrough. Moreover, spiritual sensitivity illuminates what the enemy stole that you may not even be aware of. Some people lost courage but didn't notice. Some lost spiritual hunger but thought they were just tired. Some lost prophetic direction but blamed busyness. Some lost financial grace but assumed the economy changed. Some lost favor but believed people simply shifted. Spiritual sensitivity shines light into the unseen areas of your destiny, revealing shortages that are invisible to the natural mind. To recover what was lost, you must first perceive what was stolen. Recovery begins with revelation. Revelation begins with sensitivity. Sensitivity begins with alignment. When your spirit is aligned with God, when your atmosphere is saturated with His presence, when your heart is tuned to His voice, recovery becomes possible because you can finally see clearly. Restoration is not accidental. It is enforced through prayer, alignment, and spiritual violence. Many believers hope for restoration the way one hopes for good weather, passively, vaguely, without intentional participation. But in the realm of the Spirit, nothing rises simply because you desire it, and nothing changes merely because you are tired of the old season. Restoration is a kingdom reality that must be enforced. It requires a partnership between the believer and the God who restores. There are things God is willing to bring back into your life, but they will not return until you contend, until you legislate, until you insist in the place of prayer that your destiny will not remain in the hands of the enemy. Passivity never births recovery. Prayer is one of the primary tools through which restoration is enforced. Prayer in this context is not casual communication, it is spiritual legislation. You stand as a representative of heaven, backed by the authority of Christ, and you declare what must align with the will of God concerning your life. You confront altars, you disrupt patterns, you overturn verdicts. You silence accusations, you dismantle spiritual structures the enemy used to steal from you. This is why prayer increases spiritual momentum. Restoration requires a certain level of spiritual pressure. What the enemy stole deliberately will not be returned casually. You must pray until your atmosphere shifts, until your discernment sharpens, until your authority rises, until the things that resisted you in the past begin to bow. Alignment is equally important. There are people praying fervently but walking out of order. Restoration cannot rest upon a misaligned life. When your values, habits, relationships, and priorities contradict the instructions of God, even intense prayer becomes less effective because your life is leaking spiritually. Alignment means coming under divine authority, adjusting your steps to match God's patterns, and bringing your life into agreement with His ways. When your heart, decisions, and environment align with God, you create a pathway for restoration to manifest. Many losses were caused not only by demonic interference, but by personal disobedience, broken focus, and dishonored principles. Restoration requires that these areas be corrected, so the cycle does not repeat. Spiritual violence is another component of enforcement. Violence in the spirit is not anger, it is intensity, insistence, conviction, and firmness. It is the refusal to accept loss as final. It is the refusal to allow the enemy to dictate the boundaries of your life. The Bible describes believers as warriors, not spectators, because spiritual territory is not granted to the gentle but to the forceful. When you step into spiritual violence, you adopt a posture that says, I will not negotiate my destiny. You pray with fire. You declare with authority. You reject every voice that contradicts God's promise. You resist every pattern that seeks to drag you backward. You break cycles. You enforce change. Restoration also demands spiritual intelligence. You must understand what was lost, how it was lost, and what must be rebuilt to sustain it when it returns. Many people received restoration at some point in their lives, but lost it again because they did not build the structures required to maintain it. Restoration is not just about retrieval, it is about establishment. God does not bring things back only for them to slip away again. He restores so you can become a faithful steward, and stewardship requires wisdom, discipline, awareness, and diligence. If you receive financial restoration, you must also embrace financial discipline. If you recover spiritual fire, you must cultivate a lifestyle of prayer and purity. If relationships are restored, you must build communication and character. Restoration without structure leads to repeated cycles of loss. Another key dimension of enforcement is revelation. What you cannot see, you cannot contend for. Revelation fuels conviction. When God opens your eyes to what is possible, when He shows you the picture of what should be restored, it ignites the faith required to pursue it. People without revelation settle too easily. They accept pain as normal, stagnation as destiny, and loss as God's will. But revelation shatters these illusions and empowers you to rise. When you see what God intended for you, you begin to confront everything that contradicts that intention. Restoration is a battle of alignment between heaven's intention and earthly realities. Heaven may declare restoration, but the earth requires enforcement. This is why prophetic instructions matter. Sometimes the pathway to restoration is activated by obedience to a specific instruction. Give, pray at a certain time, forgive, sow a seed, reconnect with someone, let go of something, shut a door, begin a fast. Instructions become ladders into restoration. Restoration also requires endurance. Many people start strong but stop too soon. They pray for a week and expect total change, unaware that some things require prolonged engagement. The enemy does not easily release what he captured. He fights, resists, negotiates, and manipulates, but endurance breaks resistance. Consistency weakens satanic structures. Persistence pulls down long-standing patterns. Restoration is often secured not by one powerful prayer, but by many persistent ones. In the kingdom, restoration is never accidental. It is the product of deliberate partnership with God through prayer, alignment, and spiritual violence. This moment is a prophetic summons to rise, contend, and reclaim everything that belongs to your destiny. Not every season carries the same weight, and not every moment demands the same level of spiritual response. But there are times appointed in the wisdom of God when heaven calls a man to attention, when the Spirit stirs something within you that refuses to let you remain passive, when your spirit becomes restless because something in eternity is insisting that you stand up and fight for what has been assigned to your life. The end of a year is such a moment. It is a spiritual alarm, a divine announcement, a prophetic invitation for you to step out of complacency and into contention. Heaven is saying, rise, not because you are weak, but because there is more. Contend, not because God has not spoken, but because warfare surrounds every promise. Reclaim, not because you lost by design, but because it is time for restoration to manifest. A summons means heaven is calling your name. It means the season has shifted. It means the atmosphere has changed. It means that what God intends to release will require your participation. There are seasons where God fights for you, but there are also seasons where God fights through you, and this prophetic moment is an invitation into partnership. You are not being summoned to observe, you are being summoned to engage. Something about your destiny, your family, your purpose, your prophetic assignment, your spiritual heritage is being contested, and heaven will not allow you to walk into a new season ignorant of the battle surrounding your inheritance. To rise means more than standing physically. It means awakening spiritually. It means shaking off the lethargy, the disappointment, the distractions, the tiredness, and the emotional weight of the year. It means refusing to let weariness silence your authority. Rising is a decision, a posture of defiance against everything that has tried to keep you low. Many people remain defeated not because the enemy is strong, but because they refuse to rise. When you rise, you announce to the realm of the Spirit that you have remembered who you are, you have remembered what God said, and you have remembered that destiny requires participation. Rising is the first step in reclaiming what was lost. To contend means to fight spiritually with intelligence and conviction. It means recognizing that destiny is not handed over casually. It means understanding that the enemy does not surrender without resistance. Contending requires prayer that is fervent, strategic, and consistent. It requires bold declarations that confront darkness. It requires invoking the word of God with precision. Contending is not emotional crying, it is spiritual insistence. It is saying, I will not allow my life to be defined by losses that God has already provided grace to overturn. Contending demands stamina. It requires you to stay at the gate until something shifts. It requires understanding that recovery is a battle, not a wish. Reclaiming means taking back what belongs to you, not theoretically, but practically. It means confronting the strongholds that held your finances. It means uprooting the patterns that sabotaged your relationships. It means breaking the cycles that delayed your progress. It means restoring the spiritual fire that once burned in you. It means reclaiming your peace, your clarity, your direction, your passion, your consistency, your confidence, your vision. Many people lose these things without realizing how deeply they were affected. Reclaiming means you are no longer content with remnants. You want fullness. You want your destiny back in its original shape. You want what God intended, not the version the enemy edited. A prophetic summons also carries urgency. Heaven does not summon you for what can be postponed. It summons you for what must be addressed now. This moment carries a spiritual significance that may not repeat quickly. When God summons you, it means that the window for recovery is open. It means that angelic assistance has been released. It means that the alignment required for breakthrough is available. It means that if you respond correctly, what took years to lose can be restored in moments. But if you ignore the summons, you may enter the new season carrying the same limitations, the same patterns, and the same spiritual frustrations that hindered you before. This call to rise and contend is also a call to responsibility. Restoration is not magic, it is partnership. God provides the power, but you must provide the willingness. God opens the gate, but you must walk through it. God speaks the word, but you must enforce it. A prophetic summons is God saying, I have already prepared the season, now prepare yourself. It is God saying, what was taken must return, but it will return to a ready vessel. It is God saying, I have set the stage for your recovery, but you must step into the light. This moment is not ordinary. It is not casual. It is not something to approach lightly. It is heaven's announcement that recovery is possible, restoration is available, and destiny is calling. It is the season where God invites you to rise with strength, contend with conviction, and reclaim everything that belongs to your life.